Welcome to day 14 of the 28-day body transformation audio seminar. I am Coach Jerome, and thank you for taking time, as always, out of your busy schedule to make some distinctions that will help you on your diet and fitness journey. Today, we're going to be speaking about how to put it all together. Over the last week, we have talked about a lot of different facets of diet. I've given you a lot of ideas, and today we're going to run through a hypothetical example of how to put that all together such that you can create a diet or at least modify whatever dietary approach you're taking to ensure maximum results. So looking back, the first thing I talked about was calories, the pendulum metaphor that I use. You should always have a diet that has the primary purposes of both building muscle and losing fat at the same time. And both can be done. They're not mutually exclusive. Building muscle comes down to intense resistance training, adequate protein, sufficient rest, and a focus on progression. You always want to do more in the gym than your previous workout. The next day we talked about protein. I recommend getting somewhere between 100 and maybe 150 grams a day for most men. If you're more of an endurance athlete, depending on the type of activity that you routinely perform, or if you're exercising, let's just say hypothetically more than an hour a day, 4, 5, 6 days a week, you might want to increase that protein intake a little bit. Going beyond that isn't really necessary and probably won't lead to larger amounts of muscle mass increases. And really go back and listen to that one, because I broke down the math of if you wanted to gain 10 pounds of muscle, really dense, pure, non-fat mass muscle on your body, you only need about an extra 4 grams of protein a day. After that, we talked about carbohydrates and fat and how they should be used as the lever to meet your caloric needs. And it doesn't really matter what macronutrients you need. It doesn't really matter if you're on a ketogenic diet. It doesn't really matter if you like your carbohydrates, how much carbs, how much protein, how much fat. It doesn't really matter that much, provided you're getting sufficient protein and sufficient calories. We talked briefly about supplements, which ones to use depending on which ones may be more or less ideal depending on your type of workout and your activity. And then lastly, we talked about how to adjust your diet, because inevitably there will come a time when your diet is failing to produce results because your body has made changes. And eventually that diet will support that particular level of activity for your physique. So in putting it all together, let's just use my stats right now. I am 5'11", about 230 pounds, and let's just say that my primary focus right now is fat loss. I would want to, at least for me, if I was working with a hypothetical client here who was open to anything and could follow any particular approach, we would discuss a couple different things. We would discuss what might be ideal, and then we would discuss what might be more ideal for their situation. And there's a difference. Ideal would be all other variables aside, depending on if someone could make anything work, if someone had the completely open schedule, if someone was equally willing to follow any plan, certain things may be more ideal for that person. And then based on their lifestyle and their activity and their family life and their social life, some things may be more or less ideal based on their personal preferences. These are things that we would discuss, but let's just say for this particular thought experiment that I'm just an average guy. I have a family, I have a 40-hour-a-week job, and I'm really just primarily focusing on losing fat while maintaining or slightly building upon my existing muscle mass. So the first thing I would do is I would give them a caloric limit. I would say 10 times your body weight. So 230 pounds, it comes out to 2,300 calories a day. And depending on the food choices, that could be a lot of food. And if you're making not so wise food choices, that could be a very little amount of food. So I would say 2,300 calories a day is kind of like your bank account. You don't go over that. You know, if your output exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall every time, as the old adage goes. We would talk about protein. I would say that based on your weight, the maximum amount of protein you could utilize in a day based on the overwhelming body and the overwhelming preponderance of scientific evidence suggests that would be approximately 150 grams a day. So try and skew towards that 150 grams a day, but make sure you're getting at least a minimum of about 100 grams. Again, the recommended daily allowance based on the National Institute of Health for most Americans only comes out to about 56 grams a day for what you need to eat to prevent losing muscle mass. Being an active individual in the gym, you need a little bit more, so the recommendations tend to be a little bit higher, at least in terms of the numbers that the government puts out. It would be maybe 80 or 90 grams a day. So I recommend getting at least 100 grams, but skewing closer to and having a goal of closer to that top number of 0.64 grams per pound of body weight. So for me, that comes out to about 150 grams a day. That's protein. From there, I would recommend for this particular individual in this thought experiment that he eat whatever foods he wants. Focus on protein, try and get that protein somewhat spread out throughout the day. It doesn't have to be too terribly important. And then from there, eat whatever he wanted to meet those caloric needs. Don't worry about carbs. Don't worry about fats. Try and eat fairly healthy foods. And I think we all have a fairly common definition of what it means to eat healthy foods. We know we should eat more fruits, vegetables, whole grains over more refined, less fibrous grains. We all kind of know those things, so I don't have to go into too great a depth into that now, but focus more on those foods. But you know what? If you want a Snickers bar, have it. If you want that piece of cake, try and find some way to track the nutritional and caloric content of it, but you can have it, that's fine. But don't go over that total caloric number. And oftentimes with clients, what I'll recommend is eating up to that number, at least for the consistency. Because if I have a client that I tell them they can eat, let's just say 2,300 calories a day, and they have some days where they're eating 1,200 calories, and some day where it's 23, and some days where it's 18, it becomes a little more difficult to track. And I tend to suspect that if they have those days where they're eating fewer calories, they're going to overcompensate in other days. And that particular method can still work, but it's easier more often than not if I just say, you know what, 2,300 calories a day. And if you're at 18, just eat up to that. Have a couple pieces of bread and a cup of milk. And just get up to that 23 or close to that 23 without going over. And then at least I can know that over a period of time, if we need to make the appropriate adjustments, we can take fewer calories away from that. And then putting it all together, how to make the adjustments. If that individual eventually stops losing weight for, let's just say, at least 3 weeks, just weighs himself once a week, let's say every Monday morning, 230, 230, 230. At that point, I would take it down from 2,300 calories a day, depending on any time constraints. So let's just say 2,100 calories a day if he needed to lose fat a little bit faster. We would see how the next 3 or 4 weeks worked in terms of his weight, how accurately he tracked his food, and if we needed to, we would take another calorie cut. And if you're doing that, and if you're doing that consistently, and if you're doing that accurately, you guys can have outstanding results in 6 to 12 months. One of my best, I was going to say gaining clients, but he was actually primarily focused on fat loss, came to me wanting to do a comic book convention in approximately 6 months' time. So this individual, all the dietary constraints I gave him was just a caloric number. And I told him, eat whatever you want, try and track your food as accurately as possible, but don't go over this number of calories. And he ended up losing, I believe, 48, 47, 49 pounds, somewhere in that neighborhood, just under 50 pounds in 6 months while building a significant degree of strength. His workouts started 3 times a week. They eventually shortened to 2 times a week. They eventually shortened to 1 day a week. And then from there, they shortened to once every 10 to 14 days. And once it was down to every 10 to 14 days, those particular workouts had also shortened. We started with around 10 to 12 total sets in a workout. And by the time we were done, we were only doing 6 sets in the entire workout. And this individual built a significant degree of strength. His deadlift, for example, went from, I believe, 185 we started with, and I think his last deadlift was 405 for just a couple of reps. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. But you absolutely can build muscle and lose fat at the same time if you're following a smart approach and if you're executing it consistently. Consistency is key. We will be discussing over the course of the next week the basics of weight training, resistance training, and cardio, and I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully this has been entertaining, informative, and hopefully this is more than anything else cause you guys to really think and really focus upon your own goals and your own approaches. So your assignment today is to give me a brief overview of what you're doing in regards to your diet, kind of outline everything that you've done over the last week, how you approach things now. And you know what, if you're not ready to completely view things in the way that I've pointed them out, that's fine. I'm just curious, how is your approach to diet? How are you going to make the necessary adjustments? How much protein are you consuming? Why have you decided to do that? How many carbs and fats are you consuming? Why have you decided to take that approach? Send me that email, fitcoachjerome@gmail.com, and I look forward to your responses. Thanks for listening, gentlemen. I will talk to you tomorrow.